Are we live yet? Yes, we are. All right, greetings, friends. It is Wednesday, Miércoles, Mercury's Day at 11:11 a.m. Pacific time, and that means time for Storytelling Hour here at the School of Earth Astrology. And I'm so happy to have a friend on with me today as I choke on my own spittle. This is Noah Frere, the how do we say it? Astronomologer.
Yeah, that's right. You got it.
Who, like me, is an astrologer, a practicing astrologer, who has a dear love for astronomy. He's actually teaching astronomy at the collegiate level. Who, like me, is an astrologer, a practicing astrologer, who has a dear love for astronomy. He's actually teaching astronomy. That guy, where's that coming from? That'll do. Okay, sorry. I guess that's when Gemini Brett goes a little too far, when we can hear two of me at once. And the topic for today, astronomy versus astrology, or healing the divorce with Noah Frere. So it's really great to see you, brother. Thank you so much for coming on today, especially I know you're in Knoxville, Tennessee, pretty close to the heart of a lot of disaster and the like. And maybe we can actually start there. How are you doing? Noah, can you hear me? Oh, you know what? I can't hear you, though. And you don't appear to be muted. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I had another browser open, and there was an infinite loop of your stream of words coming over and over through various windows I had open, and I didn't think about that ahead of time. So I apologize. I had to close that browser, and I missed the last few sentences you said.
No worries. That's okay. The most important ones were, how in the heavens are you doing?
I am doing okay. Doing pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, you're in Tennessee, pretty close to a lot of towns that just drown, and I understand your parents kind of in the heart of it right now, yeah?
Yeah, they live in close to Asheville, and it's like shocking they could even get out, because they live near a river, a small river, like a stream, really, but there's bridges over that stream to get to people's houses. All those bridges were washed out, except for theirs, because theirs is actually a road, a municipal road. It was stronger, and it made it through the flooding, but it was risky to cross it, and not without fear. And so they did make it, and it took them 3 times as long to drive to Knoxville, where they could kind of get back together with family. And then my dad went back that direction and to help out and in whatever way he can.
I'm so glad that you're okay and that they are okay, and just want to send big heart to everyone who is not right now and who is struggling and, you know, praying to be found, and not only in these storms in the southeast of the states, but in other places of the world, and in the storms of war that seem to be consistently raging. What a strange place to incarnate. Well, I think, you know, available to our discussion of astronomy and astrology today would be like weather, right? So this is maybe one of the gifts of modern astronomy, that we've learned so much about Earth, at least from a space-based point of view. And it would seem that that is quite new. But let me rewind to the beginning. Yeah, first let's do this. Do you feel, Noah, that astronomy and astrology were once the same?
And before I answer that, how are you?
Thanks for asking. I'm good. We just had a baby, and so life is dynamic and amazing. And she's named after one of the Pleiades. So every morning I take her on a star walk, and we get the Pleiades on her head. And
what's her name?
Maya.
Okay.
Yeah, and she'll be 17 weeks old on Sunday.
Nice.
So that's kind of all the rage around here right now, and for the next 18 years or whatever. And her brother's just loving it. He's 9 years old now, Koa, and we're having a really good time. So I appreciate you asking. It's been a while since we've connected. Love the background, by the way.
Thank you. Congratulations. 17 weeks is still like really, really young, and it still feels so fresh at that point. That's awesome.
It's amazing. Yeah, I'm stoked. I mean, I'm very confused when she's crying, and I don't know how to fix it, and needing to deal with that doesn't mean I'm supposed to fix everything, or that I can, or like learning how to be a human being, you know. But yeah, we're getting tight, and it's really nice to see Anna just in full mama mode. It's so
Nice.
natural for her. And yeah.
Okay, so your question was, do I believe, what was it?
Do you believe astronomy and astrology were once the same thing?
I can't say that I like, I hesitate to say that I believe it, but I think it was highly likely? Sure.
Yeah, I mean it's said these days by astrologers often, I think. And I'm finding like the more that I connect to my astronomical side versus my astrological, that probably they were always different kind of things.
Really? That's
Yeah.
interesting. I would love to hear why you think that.
Well, I see astronomy as the measurable side of the heavens
Mhm. Okay.
and correspondences as the immeasurable. So the measurable quantity, like when Jupiter and Saturn conjoined on December 21st, 2020, if you're into that whole Gregorian trip, in the first degree of tropical Aquarius,
Mhm.
if you're into that whole tropical signs trip, that we could like put a ruler to them and like, they were very clearly close together. Where were you for that conjunction?
And I did put a ruler to them. I actually homemade a ruler is a while ago. It's like a few years ago, but I took an actual ruler. I took a piece of, I think it was cardboard, and I lashed it to it with a rubber band, but you could move the cardboard back and forth, and it had wings and like little sights or something. And you would hold it up and just sight with your eyes the distance between the two objects and watch it change over the weeks. And you could kind of give some measurable results that way. So yes, I would call that astronomy. Where was I during the conjunction?
Yeah.
I was in West Knoxville at a park. I had my telescope set up, and people were coming and looking at it. And then I took some photos, which I was pretty happy with.
Love it. Love it. I was in Sedona for that, and just driving to find like the right place to see them. And it's kind of cool because I got them like right next to Cathedral Rock above somebody's like Christmas lights. You know what I mean? And as you know, and you saw, there was a very close conjunction, right? So for me, the astronomical side, it is that measurable side, that measurable quantity.
Okay, so can I talk about that?
Sure.
So I am anything but I'm not a historian in any legitimate way, and I'm probably a worse historian than half the Americans. I'm also not knowledgeable about anthropology. However, I have an imagination, and what I imagine happened 200,000 years ago when human-like creatures, or 500,000 years ago, were walking around and noticing things and starting to formulate ideas more thoroughly, perhaps, or in ways where, like maybe at the cusp of words, where language was starting to inform our ideas, that when they noticed the stars and the planets going back and forth, going retrograde and whatnot, making loops, and when they noticed what happened in their culture, that they started naturally making associations with those things. And there is a sense in which just the noticing is a measuring. It's not a measuring with math. It's not scientific in the usual way of how we talk about science these days. But it is, to me, it's astronomy. And as soon as that astronomy starts to bring in things about changes in our society or in our psyche, it becomes astrology. So that's why, for me, it's likely that even at the very beginning of humans' awareness of such things, that we were able to be astronomers and astrologers at the same time, and that they were the same thing. But if you're going to talk about measuring in the modern sense with math, then certainly they weren't doing that 500,000 years ago, I assume.
But I imagine they were doing things like this and seeing planets get closer. But so for me, I mean, there's an astronomical need. So whether you are a nomadic society
Mhm.
or an agricultural society, you need astronomy to know when to go, where to be, when to plant, when to reap, those kinds of things, right? And so for me, I imagine that our eldest ancestors began following the cycles of the sun and the cycles of the moon and the sun to basically know when they were in time And I also work with the stars, especially for nomadics peoples, and especially probably for seafaring people to be able to navigate from one place to another, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that for me is much more of an astronomical thing. Now, I think you and I, well, I'll speak for myself, but I imagine it's also true for you. Like, I have a sky practice, right? I don't like to just look at glyphs on a computer screen to represent Venus. Like, for me, every night that it's clear, and even nights when it's not, I'll go align myself to note where I know Venus is in the sky, connect with her reflection of sunlight in this unique way that won't really happen again, and just be there and open my heart. These mornings right now where Jupiter is so absurdly bright, I love getting out there. I love watching his sun is about to trine Jupiter, which we know means Jupiter will station retrograde. That's how he plays. Like, how high Jupiter is, especially in the sign of Gemini for Northern Hemisphere folks like ourselves. And then also like where, like the difference between the darkness of the square space up here at sunrise versus the trine space, things like that, you know? And so I really like getting out and having an astronomical experience. I mean, I think one of my challenges in astrology, I'd love to hear where you are in this, is sometimes it can be hard to listen to the planets when I have so much to say about what I think they are, what I think they're doing in this sign or that. You know what I mean? And so learning to not talk, but listen when I'm out there. But I always have an experience. So like this morning, Maya and I were out walking with the dog, and where I was just gazing at Jupiter, and great blue heron flew just so gracefully right between us.
Nice.
Maya's sleeping here, you know, and it's like, I don't know what that means, but it reminded me of stories of Leda and the Swan and all these other things, you know what I mean? And I get to have like an experience. And my projection would be that our eldest ancestors, they had the beginnings of an astronomical practice out of necessity, like following the cycles of the lights, especially to know when to be, where to go, or when to grow, reap, and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And that when you're doing this as a practice, the astrological side, correspondences really
Mm-hmm.
are going to show themselves to you. And sometimes it works like that. Bird comes by and bird means something, or child wakes up and that means something, or who knows.
Right. So a lot of, to answer your question, really depends on how we define astronomy and astrology. We probably have, you and I probably have the same definition for astronomy, pretty much. Astrology, maybe mostly, and maybe not completely. So as soon as we say that the seasons were informing when they plant, like for someone who practices electional astrology, like when do you elect your time period to plant your crops? Suddenly you're doing astrology in some kind of way. Now, it's not psychological astrology, and it's the most like basic, maybe kind of take on astrology, but I could see that being an argument. That's not how I normally think of astrology myself, however. I normally think of it as there being a psychological component, even if it's just noting the what's the word you just used when you compare different parts of life and put them together? Correspondences.
Right. Yeah. So for me, that actually what we call astrology is more like correspondences.
Mm-hmm.
It's not only like, so I see astronomy as the measurable quantity of the heavenly happenings, as correspondences as the immeasurable qualities, right? So you and I both saw Saturn and Jupiter right next to each other. Many people saw it through your scope, but how does it inspire one versus the other? And in music, this would be the difference between noise and sound.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Love it.
Right. So noise is the quantity, it's measurable, it's vibrating the medium, but you know, it becomes sound when it is heard. And the same noise heard by you will be a different sound than the one heard by me, because you are you and I am me.
Right. Or for some people who might be confused by the noise sound, they might, maybe someone else would think of it as sound versus music. But the point is, there's something that's happening on the physical level, and there's something happening on a soul level. And those two things are not like identical necessarily.
Right. And we can see that in number itself, right? So like we were taught that 1 + 1 = 2 without being encouraged to contemplate oneness.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So,
don't remember
right.
learning what one means.
In our school, it's all quantity of number
Hmm.
and not the quality, right? So I see correspondences as the quality of the heavenly happenings. And then astrology is the rainbow bridge between the measurable and the immeasurable.
Okay. That
Right.
sounds, I can totally get into that. All those definitions. Sounds good.
The sacred science of harmony would be similar, right? Like the bridge between noise and sound, or sound and music, if you will. Like whatever we see is like the quantity and the quality, right?
Mhm.
Sacred geometry, or like the sacred science of geometry, connecting the measurable side of compass and square to, as you say, like what is born in the soul when you experience this,
Yeah,
right?
I love that measurable, the measurable versus immeasurable, quantity versus quality. It's very nicely said.
Yeah, and you, I know, like myself, has studied many paradigms of astrology, newer, older. Yeah, and I always, encourage the students, because we learn geometry as we get into our astrology as well. Like, always have your compass and your rule. Always have your curves, which create immeasurable things, right? That we can only really measure through like transcendental numbers like pi, and your rule, which creates lines, right? Like, know your rules, right? Like, know how to do the calculus, if you will. But that's so much of astrology, I feel, should be a portal to open our intuitive self
Yeah, for sure.
and our compassionate self, right? And so one thing I know about you, just in spending time, is you're very ensouled and in heart being, right? And I always say the art of the chart starts in the heart. Yeah. So let me read this post to you, if that's all right. So I'm kind of working on this model of, the more I feel into my astronomer versus my astrologer, the more I'm cool with astronomy and astrology were different things. Like the oldest calendars that we found are more than 100,000 years old, moon phases carved into animal bones.
That's pretty old.
Right. And I mean, we know like the caves of Lascaux, where we see a bull and some stars above that seem to be the bull constellation, with the stars of Orion's belt and the Pleiades, for example. But like looking at actual moon phase calendars, right, we know that the old humans were, at least whoever carved that, were observing the cycles of Earth, Moon, and Sun that creates lunar phases. There's a lot of good reasons why, right? How are we going to keep time otherwise? Like working with the sun and the seasons, besides working equinoxes and solstices, can be pretty tricky to track
Hmm.
unless you're doing that through counting and math,
Hmm.
right? Where the cycles of the moon at least give you a shorter period that's very clear to
Yeah.
experience with your sensual, humanity.
Yeah, by
Um,
the way, I went to the caves of Lascaux last year.
Whoa.
I did. You can't go into the actual original caves themselves.
Yeah, don't they have
A
imitations?
extremely well-made imitation cave. It feels like the real thing.
Are you in a cave next to the cave, or above the cave, or close to the
Close by.
cave?
Close by. I think it's like down the hill. I'm not sure exactly. I don't remember, but it's very close by.
Yeah. Is
It's,
the cave ancient? Is it natural, the cave where the imitated art
I
is?
I I'm gonna have to just give somewhat of a guessing answer, but based on my experience, I would say that there's a 98% chance that it was made from scratch. But you know what? Maybe there was like one, like a starting of one, and they kind of just because they tried to really recreate it like to the T. So it's obviously, even if it was started as natural, it's no longer natural now.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that the folks who get to spend time with like the original artwork, right,
Our scientists.
are scientists. And I mean, this, I want to be careful here because I can get pretty biased. And one of the reasons is dealing with, attacks by folks like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who we'll probably talk about as we move along. And just since he's one of the great proponents of astrology doesn't work since signs aren't constellations, right? But I'm so often fielding, I don't know, energies from whether it's science or the church about what astrology is and is not. And, so I can be over biased about that, I think. I do see myself as a scientist and wish to be that way. And I mean, I was always a math science kid in school, which I know probably is true for you as well. And so I just believed my teachers when they told me astrology was fake and utter archaic nonsense, which is the only thing I learned about astrology in school, right? And I did learn that. And I learned that at least once a year, right?
I
So
don't think I learned anything about astrology, even that in school, which is a benefit, apparently. At least I didn't have to battle that myth.
yeah, I had to break out of that a bit, to return to the true mythic way, perhaps. And that took me a little while. I mean,
Yeah.
it didn't take me. It was interesting for me to find how not open-minded I was when I thought that about myself.
Yeah, that's why I'm holding this right here. This is smoky quartz. It
Mm-hmm.
looks like a world egg, right? But there's cracks in it, and you can feel the schisms. And this represents, there's a book written by somebody, Kilton Pierce, called The Crack in the Cosmic Egg. I think it was written around 1970. And he talks about this worldview we create. And he's not speaking astrologically, but he's like talking about like the third house and ninth house and the fourth house and 10th house and possibly even the fourth, eighth, and 12th all together, and how we challenge our worldview. And there's a crack in the egg. And every time you have this worldview, whether given to you or shared with people or created or co-created, that crack is the part that breaks it down and allows a new worldview to be created. So I don't know, I just kind of been carrying this around lately to kind of remind me that we're constantly creating the egg, and to find the cracks is one of the most valuable parts of that experience.
It's really helpful when we see others that we judge as closed-minded or something like that to like reflect on how that's actually just us and where are we at in that mix. And I had a conversation last week on the Gemini Rising show, which kind of, without planning, led into a conversation about astrological counseling, which was interesting because it was right around Libra eclipse time. So it kind of made sense. That's where we went, but really kind of sharing some horror stories about bad astrological practitioners. Like one for me, I sat with a girl once who, she was about 30 at the time, Saturn return at the time, but halfway there when she was in Saturn opposition, she was like 15. Her mom took her to see some great astrologer who told her she would never know love.
Oh gosh.
Right. So just as another example of things that I get to experience where it's like, oh, how much is that me, right? Or in a counseling session with a woman who's saying, for example, that her husband doesn't value like, the woo that she's finding to be true in her world. I'm like, how much do I do that to my partner, right? Like those kinds of things.
Yeah. Good point.
Right. Okay. But what is the point? So yeah, for me, I feel like astronomy and astrology, they're like, it's kind of like they are as the front and the back of a thing. But I like to see it as a marriage.
Okay. Nice.
And I feel that it's up to astrologers to heal the divorce.
Okay. I don't know if that, I mean, okay, sure, we can do what we can, but like the astronomers, if they're not open to it in any kind of way, it's never going to happen no matter what astrologers do. And it's
Right.
so much.
So it's not going to happen for them. Right. So like I don't try. There's been some really interesting times in my life. You've probably gotten some as well, like where I've connected with astronomers, like modern day astronomers, we should say, who tend towards more of a rationalistic approach, right? And I'm just going to bookmark a thing to retrograde back to because I remembered the caves of Lascaux. So we'll go back there in just a second. But right, so like these days, scientists in general tend towards materialism, rationalistic approach. Seeing is believing. There's no such thing as believing as seeing, and less of a soul in soul world, generally speaking, right? Now, like I honor that astronomers tend to go have, they wouldn't call it ceremony, I don't think, but great ceremonies often, right? Like it's really cool to see the astronomy gatherings or an eclipse happens and they all come and do their thing while many astrologers will hide under a cave rock and a, you know, sarcophagus to protect them from the dark light of, you know, whatever. But yeah, you know, where is the magic? Where is the experience? Where is the sound and the noise, so to speak, right? And I have had the opportunity to, typically after I have shown that I have some astronomical knowledge and therefore earned, okay, this guy's not entirely an idiot, the opportunity to talk about astrology with some astronomers.
Okay.
And I wouldn't say change their mind about it, but made them consider things. Like there was a time I remember where I was at a like late night party with a very young astronomer who works at JPL, Jet Propulsion's laboratory, for those that you don't know. And he was just using the regular straw man argument of, well, the constellations aren't aligned to the seasons like they once were, so all your signs are wrong. And I was like, oh, so you don't know what the tropical zodiac is?
Yeah.
And 10 minutes later, with a straw sticking out of an orange as the pole of Earth, and me showing him things about orbits and whatnot, right? And showing him astronomy, he's like, oh. He said, oh, that's a thing.
There's the crack right there.
Right. And then we ended up all night. I mean, the guy was brilliant.
Awesome.
I basically, you know, I was like, well, what time are you born? We looked at a chart and I was like, let me tell you what you do for JPL.
Okay. Did it work?
And he was born, let me try to remember the chart. He was born with the Uranus, the kind of Saturn, Uranus, Neptune gathering in Capricorn, the, what, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93 kind of zone.
Okay.
I think it was Saturn, Neptune 89, and then Uranus, Neptune in 93. He was born in there. And they were rising, is that right? I don't know. Something in this chart clearly showed me that he was doing Earth sciences and specifically looking from space at the oceans of Earth.
Oh, nice.
And I told him that, and he was like, damn. Right. And then he's like, okay, I need to know more. Right. And he like went deep into astrology. And like, I think by the morning, he was a decent astrologer.
Good fortune.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite experiences. Another one, I was out in Chaco Canyon. And I actually just kind of serendipitously, it was a June solstice. It was a Cancer solstice one year. And I serendipitously went there on a solo pilgrimage on the night that the local astronomer was doing a presentation. So I got to see this slideshow. We got to spend some time in their telescope there. Nice. One of the slideshow things that I thought was hilarious is they were showing a lot of the petroglyphs, and they were showing how common spiral petroglyphs there are. And like, we don't really know what this is. And then the next slide literally was an image, a time-lapse image of the circumpolar star around Polaris. I was like, oh, it kind of looks like that, dude. But anyway, late night, I was out under the stars and he was out there. And we were just talking about the majesty of it all. And, you know, for me, an astronomer who's called to go take a shift in the middle of nowhere at an ancient sacred site is probably more inclined to get into the sound of the noise. And I was telling him how I felt it was a shame that the ruins were blocked off when we were out there, because since they have very clear solstice alignments built into the Chaco Canyon site, that in our day and age, and it won't be like this again for 26,000-ish years, that same winter solstice sun alignment now aligns the rising of galactic center every day or night, right? And he was like, what do you mean? He's like, that's not a thing. And so I took him through like precession and stuff. And he's like, oh, wow, you're right. And he's like, how do you know this? And I told him I'm an astrologer. Right? And he's like, you could just feel it just deflate everything he knew, but I had already gained his respect.
Oh,
Right.
nice. Yeah, that's the key. Tell him after.
Right. So now I didn't get access to go watch the galactic center rise. And frankly, June solstice wouldn't be the best time to do it because it's rising at sunset and it's not dark enough out yet. But that guy lives there, and hopefully he will go do that. And that brings us back to the caves of Lascaux, because who gets to go into the caves themselves? Like the ones that have the PhDs, right?
Well, except for the filmmaker who got to go in, I think, and made a whole like documentary about it.
And in a sense, because he went in there, we got to go in there. And then a really interesting thing is our experience of that film will have so much to do with the cinematographer, the director, the one who went in.
Yeah, so an artist gained access.
Yeah, and that reminds me of, I can't remember who it was that was talking about when they first do these shuttles like to the moon or just in near Earth orbit and back, how they want the shuttle first to be filled with the artists and the poets and the dreamers.
Well, if the arts of the charts, if the astrologer is an artist, which in my worldview, in my paradigm, is true, then maybe the astrologer gets to be with the painter in that capsule.
Did you create the work behind you?
No, his friend did it. It's actually it's a whole mural. The whole wall is there's my little trip, my little family of 3 there in a boat and this beautiful tree, and I love this wall. It's like there's a sun up there. Where is it? There you are.
That's so fun because in like Zoom reality today, I pretty much figured that that was like just a picture you use for your background. I should know now. I see your shadow on it.
Oh, right. Good
Yeah,
point.
but
Yeah.
I love that that's real.
Yeah, it's a mural. Yeah, it's an artist. A couple artists did it who are friends.
So what we will hope is that even if somebody is very kind of rationalist, materialist in the caves of Lascaux, doing important anthropological, historical study, whatever it may be, that they have a moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I bet that's true because even the groupings of astronomers get together and look at Saturn or Jupiter, and they love to show these things to people who've never seen these things because they want to get the wow and they want to feel the magic. Like there's definitely magic present at these gatherings. They might not think of it as magic, quote unquote, but certainly they're feeling it. And so even in the highly rational communities, and someone, I don't remember who it was, a very famous scientist said, why do they need religion? Beauty is in the unfolding of the flower. Like that's all the religion I need. And they were, an atheist, I believe. And so even in like, I guess what I'm saying is even in the rational and measurable side of things, astronomy, there is beauty and therefore something soulful about potentially. It doesn't have to be, but often the soul presents itself to the measurable side of the equation.
Absolutely. And so, like these days, one of the great gifts of modern astrology are these images of nebulae and right the cosmology of black holes and dark matter and other just intriguing things that might say more about where we are in the universe. I mean, I do have a hard time that there's kind of this general teaching I found in my astronomy, like astronomy classes I've taken at university, of the universe is so vast, therefore you are inconsequential. Right? Instead of the universe is so vast and so therefore so are you. Right. And I don't know, like I don't think astrology per se lends itself more towards one or the other. I feel like that has to do with the astrologer and including the one that's looking at our own chart, right? But I lean towards the latter. Right.
Yeah, and it's like I had that argument with someone in college in the early 90s. I was like, everything is so small and particular and specific. that means, like, for me, that meant it was each little thing was amazing and special. And he was like, no, that means everything's completely, all the little things are very insignificant. So there's like no real meaning in life. I was like, how did you get there? Because his mood was not, you know, we were in very different mood. I mean, you could call it a mood, but it's also like a worldview, you know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, mood might lend itself more towards momentarily, where philosophy or worldview or cosmology or whatever can be lifetime. It does have a belief system, I think, would be a better way. But hopefully, our belief system is just a mood, right? and that we can change at any time.
Well, that brings up a whole nother thing with like, what is science? Is, you know, like, is science or religion and all that stuff? And we can get into that if you want or not. But like, I have a graphic that if you'd like, I could share with you later.
Yeah,
I explored the relationship between science and astrology because I couldn't figure it out for years. I was like, what is going on? I was just get confused when I thought about it. Down and, you know, like, do the Mercury thing to make it work for me. And I did come up with this, with something that worked for me. It was a couple years ago, but it still makes sense to me. But
is there a question, like a valid question there, is like, is astrology, like, as an astrologer, am I a scientist? Is that kind of the leading, what brings you into that?
Astrology science, is astrology a science?
Right.
Or any combination of the words astrology and science? Yeah, like, where do those two connect?
Yeah, I'd love to see that graphic, and
Okay.
would love to hear more. You know, I was thinking in your Lascaux experience, first of all, the movie Prometheus, which I really did not like. It ended up being just a bunch of extraterrestrial gore, kind of. But the first 10 minutes of that film, have you seen that film?
I might have seen it a couple years ago. I might not
have. It's like these researchers go into a cave and, like, you know, work with the petroglyphs and drawings there and a star map, and basically find out like the stars from which our ancestors came to this place to, it became, I think, to create us. I don't know. But then it just turned into like a, you know, aliens movie.
Right.
Unfortunately. But like the beginning, I was like, oh my God, this is my jam. So anyway, your story reminded me of that and just the caves in general. But it also reminded me, when I went to Egypt, I went to a place that's called Abu Simbel. It was a temple of Ramses II. And it's the one, you've probably seen it, like the gigantic statues out front, the 4 statues, 2 on either side of the door.
Okay.
Right. They're like, you know, you get up to like the shin of one of the statues. They're so massive.
Nice.
And it was really cool. Like, it's aligned in such a way that sunrise light only shines through the doorway portal on 2 days of the year. And one is the birth date of Ramses II, and the other is the day that he's coronated.
Wow.
So, right, as the sun is changing where it rises on the horizon, there's 1 year when it rises, and then the one day of the year, his birthday, and the other day of the year would be the day that's Antisha, right, or Antiskia, like the sun's rising in the same place. So, and then in the back, like, you walk into the halls, these just giant halls, which they're kind of like illustrated with his great conquests, which are pretty warfaring. But in the back, there is this room deep in the recess of the temple, and there's 4 beings, and the light on these 2 days will go all the way through the temple and illuminate 3 of the 4.
Was there a book written on this? Like,
I'm sure there's many
decades ago.
What's that?
It's like several decades ago.
Oh, I'm sure there's many, many, many. Like, it will be one of the temples that's very clearly referenced, especially in regards to like the archaeoastronomy of Egypt. It's a cool thing there too, is like only one of the figures is not lit or statues. It's the statue of Ptah, who's the darkness.
Wow.
So even on the day that the light reaches there, it does not illuminate Ptah, right? Amazing. But an interesting thing about it is, it was when they built the dam, which, I mean, I don't want to, I'll take too long going there, because it's basically just drowned a civilization, but it also ended a lot of famine in those lands, right? So, but they had to either just drown some of the ancient temples or move them.
Wow.
So like the Temple of Isis, and like it's on a different island than it once was. And this thing, which is a giant temple, was cut into blocks, like, I don't know, maybe 12 by 12 by 12 cubes,
Wow.
and moved block by block to its new location because its old location is now underwater, right? And then aligned in such a way that the light still comes through on these 2 days.
Wow.
And it seems like they got it off by like a day, but they really tried.
Yeah.
And that takes science, right? And that, I mean, that takes astronomy.
Right.
And what I refer to as earth astronomy, right? The relationship of Earth and the sun. And that's where I feel like, well, I mean, there have been a few astronomers that I wouldn't say in any way I've turned. Hopefully, that our time together gave them a, well, not us, all astrologers are clueless as to astronomy, because I have to imagine that's a pretty running, like, regular joke in those circles.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't want to bring astrology to the astronomers. I'd love to, but I don't think that's happening. But bringing astronomy to astrologers, like, I feel like that's a very valid effort to start ending the schism between the two. And that's something I very much respect in your work.
And you have done just that for so many years, and you've done such a fabulous job at it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, learning to and really trying to figure out, because a challenging thing I think is it is hard not to teach the astronomical side from a scientific approach. And most of us are drawn to this craft because we're very interested in the soul.
Right.
And the spirit and the psychology and what makes us tick and all of that. And so trying to find a way to express the astronomy and the measurable side so that it's not just like cold and dead, but animated, alive, and beautiful. Like that's, I feel like it's going to be one of my lifelong tasks.
It sure seems that way. And it's something I've been wanting to do as well. And I do, but I do it in like small fits and starts. Like it's not my main, it's not my MO, as they say, but it is definitely a core value to.
What is your MO?
I don't know. Asked me yesterday. It might be different from today, which is probably not a good sign. My MO is
mood does start with MO, I realize.
Good point. As an astrologer, or what's the context here?
I guess in life and astrology, are they one and the same? But I'm stuck now on the letters, because mood, which came in for us before, is MO and OD, and we shouldn't OD on our belief systems, but let them be moods, I think. So yeah, our MO should be able to change somewhat regularly. Not the best business model, right?
Right. And mood is so important. I remember also when I was in college the first time, and my brain was like on fire, and I had so many new ideas. And I remember being in a chapel, and I was looking around at all these people, college students, and they all had their thing, right? Personality, worldview. And at that time, I had so many different ideas, and each one was so large and inherently valuable that I remember thinking, like, any one of my ideas could actually kind of encompass a whole life. Like Ted over there is literally living inside of this one idea, but John is living inside of this other one, and they're both going through me in like seconds. And so their whole life, or like life mood, is, and mine as well, in some sense, no matter how many shifts I have in my mind, or like I still have a general kind of mood, you could say, that kind of, I mean, otherwise I wouldn't be married for decades. You can't be married for decades to someone in like not have some kind of through line with your mood. So even me, who proclaimed to myself so valiantly that I am above moods, of course, fall prey to some kind of mood. Um, so why am I telling you all that? I guess just to kind of explore further what we mean by the word mood. But please continue.
Well, let me ask this. Why astrology? Why do you practice astrology? What drives you?
That's a good question. So originally I was studying astronomy. I was in graduate school for physics, but I was focusing on asteroids and meteorites. So I was firmly doing astronomy. And during that time, I started getting just more and more obsessed with astrology, just coincidingly at the same time. But it didn't. I think part of it was astronomy couldn't offer me the soul that I wanted. And so I needed. Oh, is Brett gone? There you are. You're back.
I've been here. I'm just listening.
Yeah. So I think part of it was initially that I wanted more soul, and astrology is none other than spiritual astronomy. That's like how I define astrology, spiritual astronomy. So that's how it started, and it's because I loved it. It's basically, it was fun, it was meaningful, I loved it. I'm Gemini rising, and I just am drawn towards things that excite me, that I'm curious about. But as I became more serious about it and knowledgeable and started practicing it, and as the years went by, I realized that that in itself was not a sufficient reason to keep on doing it. That as I started actually finding myself empathizing more with people and having more compassion and understanding about their situations and lives, the idea of service has become more prevalent, which used to bug me. People are like, I'm here to serve you. I'm like, really? Aren't you just doing it because you like it? Because that was my worldview. I was doing what I liked. But so now my MO would be, as an astrologer, to make sure that I am in alignment with the stars as I continue to serve my own destiny, and also help to serve others in some kind of way. Because if we're not in it for others as well, it just kind of becomes empty at some point.
Absolutely. And you're also in service in teaching astronomy.
Yeah, I mean, teaching astronomy is really, really great, and it is meaningful. And I am not allowed to talk about astrology in the classroom. I teach you may have said this, I teach astronomy at the college level, and I did that once, and I got in trouble for it. It came back, and it was not.
Somebody, like a student, reported you, or how did that go?
Me talking about the zodiac, and I was even did it, and I thought a very responsible way, by talking about how signs do not equal constellations. Like it's a scientific thing, but the fact that I focused at all for like 20 minutes on signs. Now there were other things underneath the surface. It wasn't just that, but that was like the thing that was reported.
Got it.
So
let me ask a couple of questions, and sorry to friends listening if this is just a little too technical at first, but it's going to help me just get quickly to some answers. Do you teach celestial longitude and ecliptic coordinates?
I talk about RA and dec a lot, right ascension and declination, and I talk about altitude and azimuth a lot. I never talk about the longitude along the ecliptic.
Yeah.
I never talk about it because, to me, I guess I could actually talk about that, and maybe I should, because that would be one step away from astrologically meaningful.
Well, I mean, it has much more to say about the planet cycle than right ascension and declination do, right?
And so that would be a great thing to teach. It's not in the textbook that I use, and it hasn't actually occurred to me to teach it because there's so much to teach in astronomy.
What does the textbook that you use say about the zodiac? How does it define zodiac?
I think if it says it at all, it would be in one of two ways. One way would be, in the scientific sense, the zodiacal belt is, or I would say it's the constellations through which the sun makes its round every year.
Yep.
That's the zodiac. And even like scientifically, you could call that's the zodiac.
Right.
The other time it might use it is if it were like bashing astrology. And I don't remember if they do in relation to zodiac or not, but I know there is at least one negative statement about astrology in the textbook.
Mhm.
So, that's a good point. Like if I want to support astrology in my classroom, all I have to do is say, hey, what do you guys think about this statement? That's in the textbook. It's not my
Right.
idea. And then they can discuss it. And so that's actually a good idea. And teaching the longitude is nice because it is completely astronomically relevant and talks about the planets, like you were saying, back and forth. And so, yeah, I don't go out of my way to focus on how I can even open the mind of my students to astrology per se. I do go out of my way to open their mind to the beauty of creation, the beauty of life, and having an open attitude. But I very much stress to them the importance of science, actually, because in this day and age, and maybe in many days and ages, science is a real problem. The way the attitude of much of the public on science is problematic. And I'm extremely pro science. Like I'm pro science 100%. I like science. I love science. I believe in science. I admire science. I do science. So it's very important to me to make sure that since I'm teaching a science class, the students don't walk away thinking the earth is flat.
Right. Who lays down well, let me just ask, in your opinion, should you be talking about astrology in an astronomy class?
I mean, should, it's like whenever I hear the word should, the unanswered parentheses, for what purpose? Should
Right.
for what purpose? So should for the purpose of enlightening humanity? Like not necessarily should, but would it be a good idea? Sure, if the class can handle it, if the students are up for it, absolutely, I think it would be a good idea. So in that case, you have to kind of gauge your students.
Right. I mean, the other place that astrology has entered astronomy courses that I've taken, and look, it's been a long time, so I really need to, I might be inaccurate when I say these things. I feel now that I should find hopefully some free online college classes I can take. Like Harvard actually is a place where you can go there and just take the class and see what they teach about astrology, how they mention astrology, if at all, how they teach things about like zero Aries. So there's some comments here actually that I think I'll address. We can look at a little bit astronomically today because there's a very clear misconception about the astronomy of the tropical zodiac that causes many modern astronomers, especially, but also astrologers, to believe that the tropical zodiac is not astronomical, which just couldn't be further from the truth.
In fact, while preparing for this live today, I kind of just wanted to see, I want to get my head in the right space. And I like Googled astronomy versus astrology on YouTube. And I looked at a couple of videos, and one of them was like 17 minutes long by someone who does astronomy. And they were like bashing astrology. And I just got in the mood, I started arguing and I started showing him how signs are not constellations. And I talked about the equinoxes and precession and all that. And he didn't know. I'm pretty sure he'd never thought of it in his life because he's never been taught. He does not know what signs are. And this is like what you've said at least twice in this hour already. It's so prevalent. It's by far most people, I would say 98% of the population does not know that signs do not equal constellations.
Right. And one of the things,
critical to know that.
There at one point in astronomy was a shift from ecliptic orientation to equatorial orientation.
When?
Well, I don't know when, but my imagination would say, well, I believe it would be through the advent of the telescope and the popularity of the telescope, because ecliptic coordinates don't do too much for you when you're out with the telescope. I mean, locally, azimuth and altitude, and those it's like, what are these people talking about? I'm sure some of you, right? So altitude, it's simply how high, right? So like with the convention is the ground is 0 degrees altitude and the zenith above our heads is 90. And you can even go -90, but you're not going to really find too much if you point your telescope to -20 altitude. You're looking at a rock, right? So altitude, I think we all know. Azimuth is, as well as altitude is up and down. Azimuth is around and around. So north is an azimuth. Northeast is an azimuth. I mean, we use specific degrees, but they're like compass headings is azimuth, right? So that orientation, that coordinate system, which is a very local coordinate system. Like if I said right now, oh, Jupiter's at 270 degrees azimuth and 10 degrees altitude, that's not going to be true an hour away.
Yeah, so my guess is there's a couple things that really led to the prevalence of the equatorial coordinate system, which is not altitude and azimuth, but it's like,
yeah. Let's say what equatorial coordinates are then.
Okay, so the
because
equatorial
they are global.
So a coordinate system is any system in which you can gauge the placement of something on some kind of grid. So for instance, you just described the alt-az coordinate system where you have altitude and azimuth, and it's for your local space. For people who are near Gemini Brett right now, he will say where that balloon is, and they will all be able to look because they all have the same perspective. If I looked 270 degrees and 10 degrees, I will not see that balloon because I'm far away, right? So it's only good for people who are nearby you. Now, back in the old days, that's all the people were. This is before internet, before all that. Like you only talk to people who are around you. So it was very useful. But another coordinate system is more universal. So anyone in the world can find the balloon if you tell them the universal coordinate system. You just have to give them universal coordinates. That's called the equatorial coordinate system. And it's basically a projection of the Earth's coordinates into space. Because the Earth, it's like tilted around 23 degrees, and it's got an equator. If you project that equator into space forever, you have an equatorial equator coordinate. And so you can be anywhere on the Earth, but you'll know what star that's pointing to if it's in alignment with the equator. It doesn't matter where you are. It's just,
and actually the tilt doesn't even matter. Well,
I'll
use this one because if we take this band out, which is the ecliptic, really the equator, as Noah was just saying, like equatorial coordinates, we're just taking Earth's equator, right? Which is what? It's the plane of our daily rotation.
Right.
Right. And so how do we on Earth experience Earth rotating? Through witnessing the heavens apparently rotating about us, right? So an amazing thing is you watch the eastern sky rise. Why does that happen? Because Earth is falling in that direction, right? And so we can project Earth's equator out into space, all these different bands of, or parallels, we call them bands of latitude out into space, meridians or longitude, and then you get what's called the equatorial coordinate system. And when you're watching the spinning sky, like, so if we go out and we set up our telescopes, right, and I want to track something from there to there, it's going to go from there to there because the sky is spinning. And so you really want to orient towards the spinning sky. Now, if you're looking from Quito in Ecuador versus Minneapolis, halfway between the equator and the North Pole, your experience of equatorial coordinates are going to be a little bit different. Like at Santa's house, the North Pole, the North Star is right above your head. At the equator, it's on the ground.
But the coordinate will be the same.
And the coordinate will be the same, right? So we're just talking about like something out in space. How far north or south of the equator is it? And then how far east or west of where? And the of where is 0 tropical Aries. So this is another place where the astronomer could reference astrology.
Yeah, and there's one other place that's very similar to that. In fact, it is that in another sense. When I use stellarium for my class all the time, and there's the little Aries glyph and the Cancer glyph, and I will show them. It's like, oh, look at there's the astrology glyph in the science program. How about that? I just like leave that.
And notice that it's not. And by the way, if you look at the image that I created for our jam together today, let me get that up again. What I wanted to emphasize here is that a few things. Can you see me like circling Jupiter with this cursor?
Yeah.
So we see that Jupiter is aligned to the horns of the bull. So sidereal astrologers, or some of like the, the new crew, like the 13 sign folks, would say, hey, that's a Taurus Jupiter. You're just like, hey, look at it. It's with the bull. Or they'll say, though, with Taurus. Now, I learned to use words like Taurus and Gemini and Cancer to describe signs. And I mean tropical signs, and I'll get back to that. And I learned to use words like bull and twins and crab to describe constellations, because they are very different things. And we've known about this for a long time. So, I mean, it's a very confusing thing if you follow tropical astrology, as I do, to look at Jupiter in this chart. It says 2120 Gemini, but Jupiter's in the horns of the bull. Or to look at this Cancer Mars aligned with the twins, when the crab is way over there. And isn't Cancer the crab? No, Cancer is this degree, which is right above Earth's tropic of Cancer. It's the degree of the sun's path, and therefore, for the most part, the path of the planets, because our solar system is relatively flat, towards which the Earth's northern pole is always leaning. And it's the point of greatest, what we call declination. It's the point of the sun's path, or the heart of the zodiac of the ecliptic, that's furthest north of the equator. So this image, not the chart, but the image here with the constellations and Jupiter supersized, that comes from Stellarium astronomy software, which has changed my life. And I do love, as Noah was just saying, that they have like the Cancer glyph here, even though you can see that's at the foot of the Gemini twin, at the hand of the high man, to use the Celtic prophetic traditions terms, but in the horns of the bull, right? Why does that say Cancer if the crab is all the way over there? Why does this say Libra? I'm not showing the constellations, but it's actually in the priestess constellation, which is the term I use for Virgo, because again, I use Virgo to describe a tropical sign and Libra to describe this point specifically, which is one of the two intersections of the equator and the ecliptic. And we're here really to speak more about like astrology versus astrology, ending the divorce, than to like teach astronomy.
That's a great image to display all of those. That's a really nice, sophisticated image.
So let's just talk, though, briefly about the three zodiacs, because there's some comments here. And Wendy, hopefully you're okay with me putting this on this screen. She'll say things like this, which is important. The constellation of Virgo takes up 44 degrees. Most actually measure it as 47. Regardless, it's not 30, right? It is so much more than a 12th part or 30 degrees region of space along the ecliptic plane. I've been looking as I've been sharing, and especially when you were, for the book by Geminos. Do you have that book, Noah? The Introduction to the Phenomena, we believe it was called.
No, I don't.
You get it. It's awesome.
Okay.
Geminos was a Hellenistic astrologer, we think somewhere between 100 BC and 100 AD.
Nice.
And he just lays out like the astronomical thought at the time.
It was called what?
We believe, and we're not even sure, that it was called the Introduction to the Phenomena.
Okay. I'm putting it in the chat. Dan.
Yeah, I'm gonna like just open up a oh, thanks for that. And by the way, speaking of, Winter earlier wrote the name of a film in the caves of Lascaux by Werner Herzog, The Cave of Forgotten.
Yeah, Herzog, yeah.
Yeah, so if y'all want to check that out, what Noah was describing earlier, go there. I was just thinking, it's kind of off topic, but I'm trying to find something as I say this. I want to show Koa, who's the 9-year-old here.
We would be on topic if we weren't off topic, at least.
That's how we roll. This is the Gemini Rising crew. That there's a really wonderful series called Shakespeare. What is it called? Cracking the Shakespeare Code. where you basically start with a Shakespeare academic ridiculing this guy who claims to be decoding the Shakespeare portfolio, which was not written by some cat named Shakespeare, but by a mysterious, probable group of people, and yada, yada, yada. It's really great. And it leads eventually to this just great treasure hunt. I really highly recommend it for anyone. And the reason why I want to show it to Koa is his father leans much more towards a rationalistic model and tells Koa things like astrology is fake, which is difficult when he comes to our house, his mother's house, because his mom and her partner are both astrologers. And so that can be pretty challenging. And I think he's navigating it super well to live in both of those worlds, which I actually don't think is necessarily the most unhealthy thing if you can like stay human despite it all, right? That's part of kind of like astrology, astronomy in some regards, you know? But I really want to just show him things without taking him into the deepest rabbit holes of conspiracy theory that will help him kind of open his mind a little bit. So some things that we've been looking at, like he's really into dinosaurs, shocker, he's a kid. But we've been reading like adult paleontology stuff together. And I'm like, see, they thought that bone that's like on the arm used to be on the head. He's like, what? No. It's just like, see, like science is allowed to evolve as we find more information.
Yes, I would love to talk more about whether or not science evolves too. That's a really interesting idea to me, but that's if we have time later.
Yeah. So let me show you this. How do we get to it? I have to do a little trick. Play slideshow in window. Okay, now, Noah, you can tell me if this is on your screen. Do you see this book cover?
Yes, I do.
Okay, yeah, so we believe it's the introduction to the phenomena.
Nice.
And yeah, I'm tripping about this. I learned about it pretty recently. But like Geminos was an astrologer who was really hip on getting astrologers astronomically educated back in the day. Cool. And I'm like, whoa, I stole that guy's name and his like shtick. Right?
Amazing. No, I've never heard of this. This is great.
Yeah. And then it gets weirder for me because the first translation to a modern language was in 1975, which is when I was born. I think that was French. And then it was first translated into English in 2005 at the University of Washington, which is the year I graduated from the University of Washington.
So without getting too wacko on you, you may be this dude.
Or I should at least be fascinated with him, and I should finish the tale. Anyway, the book. So let's just read this part. This is from a chapter called Signs and Constellations, in which he writes, the word sign is used in two ways. According to one way, it is a 12th part of the zodiac circle. That is a certain interval of space demarcated by stars or points. According to the other, it is an image formed from the stars. The 12th parts are equal in size. But the constellation signs are not equal in size, nor are they formed from equal numbers of stars, nor do they all exactly fill the spaces assigned to the 12th parts. So one reason why I want to bring this in, it's not like this is a new conversation for astrology.
Wow.
That signs and constellations are not the same thing. That, for example, the Virgo constellation, which I prefer to call priestess, to differentiate signs, Virgo, from constellations, priestess, is like 47 degrees of arc, at least according to the International Astronomical Union, whose constellational boundaries most people are using as like fact these days, though they were only formed in 1929.
Can I just say that this is that old? This is amazing. This is a beautiful find. I'm in shock.
I actually think that he's describing three zodiacs here. I think he's speaking about a constellational zodiac, which I just describe as the constellations which embrace the ecliptic plane. And therefore, they are the constellations that the sun each year, and generally speaking, the moon each month, and the planets, according to their own pace, travel, right? That's the ecliptic, right? So I think we're hearing about constellation signs describing those constellations. But notice that when he says the equal signs, right, the 12th parts, according to one way, it is a 12th part of the zodiac circle that is a certain interval of space demarcated by stars or points. And I think he's actually therefore referencing both a sidereal zodiac, where we take that ecliptic plane, and though the constellations aren't equal in size, we want equal geometries, right? 12ness, where does it come from? Maybe the 12 months a year, but that's tricky because there's 12.39 and all sorts of other things. Maybe it's these 12 bits on our hand. There's a lot of different ways to get to 12, but what we know is it's the first abundant number. It's the first number that has polarity, triplicity, and quadruplicity. And so like 13 sign folks, they're completely losing geometry, right? Which is like, so traditionally in the quadrivium sacred sciences, we have astronomy, which is number in time and space. And therefore it is composed of number in time, which is harmony, number in space, which is geometry, and number itself. And the three quote unquote lower sciences beneath astronomy in the sacred study clearly show you why 12. So anyway, that's like opinion. But so siderealists, they pick a star and then say, okay, like Spica, or why not Regulus? I've never seen a Regulus sidereal zodiac. And they use that star as the origin point and then divide the circle into 12 equal slices of 30 degrees from there, which do not map the constellations because the zodiac constellations vary significantly in size.
Question. I've been wondering this. So if there are some astrologers, and I would bet money that there are, that actually do use the constellations themselves as their demarcations.
Yeah, well, so that's like the 13th sign Ophiuchian crew.
Yeah, but are they actually using, like, Scorpio has, you know, much smaller span compared to like
the
Ophiuchian?
Only ones I have seen in a constellational zodiac at all. So like the Mula pin, like going way back to Babylon, had constellational zodiac. It wasn't about the equal degrees or divisions. The equal parts were born after that time. And by the way, a really significant part of Mula pin is all about equatorial coordinates too. Because they have, I mean, it was like from a local point of view, it might be more like altitude based, but it's really equatorial, where there was high stuff Enlil, middle stuff Anu, and low stuff Enki. Right. And so you really get this kind of like declination basis. And then they're looking eventually at like the signs in their bands of declination, which is what many modern tropical astrologers are up to, actually taking a X coordinate from ecliptic, right, longitude, zodiac degrees, and then taking the Y coordinate from the equatorial of declination, which is this really interesting thing. Yeah, anyway, so you can pick a star and then you divide the zodiac from there. Now, the question is which star? If you're like, let's even rewind. If you're going to use constellations, whose constellations are you using? Right? Do you think people in Bali saw that priestess constellation as a priestess or a woman with a shaft of wheat? They don't have wheat there. Right? Do you think that the Lakota people knew Orion as a hunter? They didn't. It was the hand of the chief. Right? So even then, if you're going to use like the Greco-Roman view of the constellations, know that you've just chosen one culture only, or two.
Especially since the constellations changed since the Greco-Roman time period.
Stars have moved in part or closer, like that.
Well, not just that, but like one of the constellations was really big. It was broken into like 3 different constellations by the International Astronomical Union.
Right. And so this to me is the most hilarious thing about like the 13 sign crowd, is they typically, from what I've only seen them using the boundaries of constellations as defined by the International Astronomical Union, who vehemently hates astrology.
That is ironic.
Right? So why should an astrologer choose to use ecliptic divisions as set forth by astrology haters?
Now, I would like to present a counter argument, because just to be fair to different paradigms, I have no essential problem with someone using 13 constellations to inform their astrology and as having that be the fundamental for it. However, one wonders if the inception of that paradigm came from a misunderstanding or ignorance about tropical astrology. Because when I was first exploring astrology and confused about it, I Googled stuff like that, and I got on some woman's website. She was like, tropical astrology is wrong because this and that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let's look into this. And it was not until I did some more study that I realized, oh, there are different methods of astrology. Tropical is not sidereal, and there's different kinds of both, right? And so if the person who is practicing 13 sign astrology is doing it from a place of information and knowledge, and that's just what they like to do, and they like to be in alignment with the IAU's definition, that's fine. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. I, as a scientist and a teacher of astronomy, fully could get on board with practicing a kind of astrology that uses the IAU constellations. However, I would not in any way declare it to be better than any other kind of astrology or more true. It would just be a one modality that I practiced.
Yeah.
However, being someone who loves the Lakotans for personal historical reasons, if I chose to use the Lakodian star field for my practice, I would also be able to do that. I could do both on different days or in different hours.
Totally.
It's not that I have a problem with 13 signs, although I don't necessarily love the word signs, because I'm with you, signs do not equal constellations. But I just want to make sure that people are approaching their paradigm from a place of knowledge and preferably wisdom, whatever that means, rather than a place of either reacting or a place of ignorance.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think having a constellational essence in your astrology is beautiful.
Yes, and I do that through mythology.
Yeah, and it even so, like, my clients, like, we're typically more in the chart to start, but eventually we'll get into like stellarium, and it's like, hey, consider that the big bear was standing on the ground when you were born. Right. And that has a whole thing to offer. And then I'm not only not looking at the ecliptic and the planets, I'm turning my back to them and looking in the other direction. Right. And just strange, beautiful, mythic stories come in. But I might get equal stories if I consider the Scorpion constellation to be Maui's fishhook, or to be a great heavenly parrot, as it was seen in some Australian civilizations way back in the day. Right. And so there's also something about studying the constellational expression and the stars themselves. And so a thing I think that's really important is that while stars are celestial, constellations are terrestrial. Right. So I mean, what does Orion's belt look like from Betelgeuse? And it doesn't look like Orion's belt. Right. Like that's, I mean, it's probably our whole solar system. Probably the constellations look pretty similar on Mars as they do on Earth. I mean, I would imagine they look exactly the same, but you have a different ecliptic. Mars has his own zodiac.
Definitely.
Right. And to come to the tropical zodiac, and I want to bring this back to, well, are there actually ways where you might leak some astrology? And I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, but just as an interesting thing, should some astrology be mentioned in astronomy classes besides this is stupid, archaic nonsense as it's typically presented in the textbooks, et cetera, of our day and age, right? So why divide into equal 12 parts? Well, that's interesting. And one of the reasons is because it helps for the rulers. I mean, I'm sorry, not like kings and queens. I mean, like measurement, right? So like if you want to measure your distance around a circle, to have this distance be 15 degrees and then this 22 degrees and this one 26 and this one 42, right? Like that's not nearly as scientific or convenient as 30, 30, 30, 30, 30. For me, there's much more ensouled and important reasons than that. And I can see them right here in the seed of life, which is how you draw the zodiac. But I think that's a kind of discussion for a different time. But if we wanted to divide the ecliptic of these, varied size constellations into equal parts, well, where do you start? And that brings in the great debate of Ayam Namsha, because there are so many different sidereal zodiacs, which sidereal means of the stars. You pick a star and then you divide into 12 equal 30-degree slices from there. But which star? And I don't know that there's been wars fought over it, but certainly Twitter wars fought over it. And, this is what I will say about the tropical zodiac. Well, it has nothing to do with the constellations, and frankly, it never did. It is the only one of these three zodiacal cosmologies that is not arbitrary. A constellational framework is completely arbitrary and should be, I don't know, dependent upon the cultural context through which you are looking, including, by the way, your own and your own mood. I love making constellations when I'm out and about. And I think that's okay. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I love, just like with a tarot card, I love to show it to somebody and say, what do you see? I love to show pictures in Stellarium without the drawings in and say, hey, what do you see if I connect these dots? And then you get these amazing pictures out of people.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, the solstices and the equinoxes are universal phenomena.
Right. And so part of this has come from my trying to understand, why is the tropical zodiac a thing? Because it's heartbreaking when you find out it's not astronomical. I mean, sorry, when it's not constellational. Like when I first knew Jupiter was in Gemini, it was 12 years ago. And then I saw Jupiter, literally then I was in Peru in the horns of the bull, like he is now. I was like, what?
Is astrology wrong? What happened?
Absolutely. And a lot of people are having that question. It's a good question to ask. And then it's fueled by so many of the people who are now saying things like, oh, the tropical signs are fake. They don't align to the constellations like they did in the Hellenistic days. And 2,000 years ago, it was all perfect. It's like, no, it wasn't. And it can't be. And then so people might go more towards constellational space. Okay, well, whose constellations are you using and who defines the boundaries? So the IAU, like in my storytelling hour, which I do weekly on Wednesdays, I had a no fucus investigating the 13th sign crime, I called it. Sorry, biased here. But like the IAU, they cut Antares off of the ecliptic. Like Antares, the 14th brightest star in the sky, which is less than 5 degrees in the ecliptic. And now that same zone is part of Ophiuchus. And the closest star is 11.5 degrees north. Right. So a really fun thing in astronomy these days is both celestial longitude, which we know as ecliptic degrees, zodiac degrees, if you're using the tropical zodiac. Right. The origin point is what we call 0 Aries, and that is where the ecliptic, which is the plane of the year, Earth's orbital path, and therefore from Earth's point of view, the path that the sun takes about us, where the ecliptic intersects the equator, the plane of the day, Earth's rotational axis, going north. And the truth is, because Earth's North Pole leans towards 0 tropical Cancer, that's why it's above Earth's Tropic of Cancer, in every moment of forever, that 0 Aries point of the tropical zodiac is due east, not of Richmond, California, or Knoxville, Tennessee. We have different easts right now, but there is a global north, a global south, and therefore a global east and global west. And that Pisces Aries cusp of the tropical zodiac, which I call the Earth zodiac and the directional zodiac, is due east of Earth center, and east is the place of beginnings. So while you're not going to do that in an astronomy class, you can certainly reference that, hey, the origin point of right ascension,
yeah,
is the intersection of equator and ecliptic, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the phrasing that you have, the plane of the year and the plane of the day coinciding, that's such a beautiful idea. Because like bringing two different time periods together, and that 0 degrees Aries being such a special point. Yes, in our culture, because Aries is considered the first sign, which is not. But there is some value to considering, Aries is like action. And that very first, at the cusp of Aries being such an actionable point, thinking of it in terms of bringing together two different timelines is just, I don't know, it's really interesting. It's food for thought.
And I think it's Ram, not because that constellation looks anything like a ram. It really just
it's like it's like the most boring constellation in the sky. Although I
do so much with it.
Being an Aries sun, I'm an Aries sun. I've come to love the very simple line that the ram is in the sky. But
Yeah, but your Aries sun was also aligned to the Fishes constellation.
the Sagittarius sun is aligned with the
Your Aries sun was aligned to the Fishes constellation, not to the Ram. Right?
Okay, so that makes me a fish.
So
Picture
I think it's the Ram for this. If you watch the eastern sky rise at night, especially close to the equator, the sky does this.
Yeah. I've seen this video that you did actually once, and we
Right?
put the ages of Aries, the ages of Taurus. It was really, really good.
Yes, like back in the day, that zone was actually called the hireling,
Oh wow. Okay.
the hired man, and actually used parts of the stars from the Ram constellation in the triangulum right above it. Like in the Mula pin, there was no Ram yet. It was the latest of the current 12 zodiac constellations, or 13 if you prefer, that came onto the scene. The scales is actually another one interesting. The scales are clearly an image of equal light and equal night, right? So you have some tropical essence there. I will say this about Cancer, like it's the crab that walks sideways, just like the sun does between solstices, or the moon does between the tropicos as well every month, you know. And the crabs live where? At the tides, which walk sideways like that too. Like the crab constellation doesn't look particularly crabby either. In Egypt, it was a scarab. So I think just like an important thing and a beautiful thing about the tropical zodiac is it has non-arbitrary definition. And constellations are arbitrary. That doesn't make them wrong or any particular system. They can be beautiful. And I'm with you. Like if people want a 13 sign, like 13 sign all the way, sadly, you're missing your opportunity of the really significant, beautiful aspect tradition of the astrological craft.
Well, which is why it's nice to practice more than one modality sometimes. I mean, people do Eastern and Western astrology. I don't want to go there, but I am interested in learning Tibetan astrology.
Right on. I'm excited to learn some of that from you when you're ready to teach me, all right?
It's going to take a while. It's going to take a while. So, you know.
Yeah, in sidereal astrology, it offers that geometrical approach of polarity, triplicity, quadruplicity, but it's only about, like the constellational zodiac, sidereal zodiac, they're only about the ecliptic. They're only about the plane of the year or the path of the planets. Only tropical astrology also brings in, I mean, you can honor equinoxes and solstices in any framework you're using, right? Like you're teaching them in astronomy where you're not teaching science, right?
Yeah.
But only the tropical zodiac brings you both the plane of day and the plane of year. You get it in sidereal by having signs and houses, because houses are equatorial. Anyway, I'm sorry we got so technical. I wanted to stay a little bit more philosophical like we began. But, you know, the other place where zodiac can definitely come into an astronomy class is, or astrology, so much of our spherical trigonometry and other mathematical innovations were made by astrologers.
Oh, because the house systems and stuff, you mean?
Yeah, because we had to figure it out. So back to the astronomy versus astrology. For me, astronomy, it's like it has to happen necessarily. If you want to know where to travel, when, as a nomadic civilization, if you want to know when to plant as an agricultural civilization, you need to know the cycles of at least the sun and the moon.
Yeah, like all the old astrologers were mathematicians, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's literally what mathematician meant.
Oh.
You were an astrologer and astronomer, likely a geometer and all the other sacred sciences too, right?
Good old
days. They were also called computers.
Good old days.
But it wouldn't have just been computation. It would have been more like the AI version of a computer. I don't know. They were ensouled so much more, you know. But then what happened as well, who knows how astrology came in? Like the general presumption is people watched eclipses enough in the heavens, watched what was happening on the earth, and then decided that that thing in the heavens means this on earth.
Are you using the word eclipses arbitrarily, or
no? I mean like an eclipse or like a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction.
Yeah, any specific. So you just eclipse was an arbitrary thing. Okay.
Right. Well, let's say like, what does Jupiter-Saturn conjunction mean through correspondences, right? Like not even in signs, but just Jupiter and Saturn getting together.
I'll tell you, my favorite take on Jupiter-Saturn recently was not my creation. I heard it from someone else, and immediately I was like, I landed there. Jupiter-Saturn represents the things that the world where we have rules and where we expand beyond those rules, the interplay of contraction and expansion, it's where Jupiter and Saturn can agree that our world becomes. And that came from Austin Coppock. It was a statement Austin Coppock made, and I just think it's the best. It's my favorite Jupiter Saturn construct now.
I think that's wonderful. I mean, back in the day, and maybe because it was the longest cycle, since they didn't have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and those we don't see without our telescopes.
Well, it's also very like it's short enough to be very comprehensible.
Right. But it's also long, and so it was very much seen as like the social cycle, right? But like, so we can get after it by having a feeling of what Jupiter is and what Saturn is, and then we combine the two. But how did we ever just decide what Jupiter was or what Saturn was? Right? Like, I don't think that was all trial and error and witness and experience. I mean, like, look, even Jupiter Saturn conjunctions, they only happen about every 20 years. So you're going to have 4 of them and maybe 5 in a really long lifetime. You'd have to track them for generations. You'd have to have your grandchildren believing your notes if it was something you were passing down through your line. Do you feel me?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of this really is, it's just, there's so much soul and there's so much listening to it. I went out to watch the moon occult, some stars of the Pleiades the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And this clear thing came through of like that. Now I've learned this about occultations, that they help us hear. What came through is the ears of the heart can now hear the hidden messages of those stars. And so I'll work with that until I decide it doesn't work. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But who am I to say? And the answer is, you're a human being. And you're all human beings, right? And so we have the opportunity, I think, to learn the traditional approaches, to learn the modern approach, like learn the rules, but also know that, like, who wrote them? So like, know your history a bit, right? So anyway, for me, it's like they were doing the astronomy by necessity. Once you start tracking the cycles, you have an ensouled experience. Just like we hope the PhDs in the cave of Lascaux will. Maybe some of them are brave enough to turn the lights off and just experience it as it was in ancient days, and what visions are going to come through when it's dark in the cave, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then the astronomers wanted to do so much more. Like Noah practices electional astrology, like astrology of, launching your ship, launching your business, doing many things. Or in Horary astrology, like, when's my dog going to come home? We need to know more of the when, so timing comes through. And so like essential times became so specific. And how do we even figure what that is? Like a really interesting thing about the 12 parts is it's very often incorrectly taught by astrology that because the day is 24 hours and there's 12 signs, each sign rises in 2 hours.
Right.
Which is just not at all true.
And which sign rises the fastest, Gemini, Brett?
Depends on where on earth you are, my friend.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought it was always Aries.
Pisces and Aries, first of all, equally.
Okay.
Right. So it's a reflection against, and this is like another thing about the tropical zodiac. Like you don't get Anticia in a sidereal or a constellational zodiac.
Right.
You don't get ascensional times and their clear symmetry in a constellational or sidereal zodiac. There's like so many beautiful astronomical truths where you basically have to convert to tropical to bring them into like a sidereal cosmology, for example.
So learning moment for Noah. So yeah, you're right. That since the cusp of Aries is the same in the left and the right, Pisces and Aries, that obviously immediately makes sense that Pisces and Aries would be equal in that way. But how does it depend on Earth? Is that true? Like it's some for
in
some
the southern hemisphere, tropical Virgo and Libra are the fastest rising signs.
Okay.
And tropical Aries, and well, the slowest is a kind of interesting, a different thing. But check this out: Pisces is speeding up from 0 to 30 degrees, and Aries is slowing down from 0 to 30 degrees. And then once we get to Taurus, so this is all northern hemisphere, it really starts getting slow, which we should feel in the Aries thing. But you get to ask this really fun question of like, why does Pisces rush and do all the stuff that we project into Aries. Hi, baby.
Interesting.
Maya's going to join us for the end of our jam here today.
Yay. Oh, let me know if you want to see that graphic comparing.
I do very much.
What is the science of astrology as I've come to terms with it? Hi, Maya. Dark
Hi,
hair.
Maya. Hi, everyone.
Oh, that's so nice.
Oh, yes. Let's see it.
You want to see it right now?
Yeah. Do you know how to share it?
Let me share. Oh, you know what? It's not up anymore, but I can probably pull it up real quick. It's just on my website.
This is an interesting thing. You mentioned Tibetan astrology before, which I can't wait to learn more about. But Mani has been studying in those practices for a long time, and she shares this really cool thing that it's the same word for heart and mind in the Tibetan language.
Oh, you know what's funny? That makes sense because I'm a Buddhist, and I asked my Lama Karma, one of my Lama teachers here in Tennessee, what's the difference between mind and heart? Like last year, and he immediately, before I even finished the question, he's like, same thing. There's like zero time passed. Like I said before I finished the question, that was the answer. I was like, oh, okay, well that simplifies things.
Did you believe him?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, he's my Lama, right? But also, it made sense because it's not. My mind can go different ways very easily. It doesn't mean I only believe that's the only answer, but it was a form. It was a form of answer that I could immediately sink into and still retain. I'm always working with the difference between mind and heart on a regular, commonplace basis. So to have this other way of offering them being the same opens up a whole new world of possibility, basically.
Yes.
Okay. So I am going to share screen. And it says, allow StreamYard to see your screen. Sure. And entire screen, allow. Let's see if this works. Can you see?
I think I have to like put it up.
Yeah. Well.
And no, like keep trying. Yeah, we got it. Let me do that. Yes.
You can see. Oh, let me go back to.
And let's mention while we are here that this is. Oh no, go back to that bit. Yeah, this is on Noah's website, which is at noahfrere.com. So if you want to book a consultation with Noah or check out his work, make sure you head over there. I will share a link in the chat right now to Noah's homepage. All right, what are we looking at, sir?
So this is a little blog entry I made about a year and 3/4 ago when I was trying to figure out the relationship between astrology and science. And I don't feel comfortable calling astrology science. Astrology is not a science to me because I teach science. And I know that the steps of science are these. You make some observations, you ask a question, you suggest a hypothesis, you make a prediction, you get some results, and you draw some conclusions. If your conclusions, supported your hypothesis, then you just repeat, and you keep on repeating, and you're always strengthening that hypothesis, such as Einstein's theories of gravity have been continually demonstrated to be good theories. You don't ever prove a theory true unconditionally. There's always support and evidence for a theory, but you don't just like proclaim it as universal truth. That's not how science works. However, if your results do not support the hypothesis, then you either edit your hypothesis or form a new one or whatever. Now, what's missing from these steps is the sharing. Down here, you share your results with other people and you come to some consensus. That's very important. If you're in your own little cave doing your own science, sure, you can do it all day long. But in the end, if you're the only one who knows about it, it doesn't do anyone else in the world any good. And if everyone else has different results because they had some other things they were working with, then you got to communicate, right? We're a community of humans. So that is also an important part, not in this graphic. So as someone who doesn't see astrology as being scientific per se, because it is a spiritual discipline for me and an artistic discipline, I had to figure out how I could make sense of this. So I actually found a way, if you scroll down, to to frame astrology using this kind of scientific, this is a scientific process, right? In a way that makes sense. Now, I'm not going to describe this to you. It's too complicated, like word for word. I just want to give you the gist of it, and you can go to the website and see, read it more and thorough if you want. But in essence, I'll stop sharing so I can just describe it now. The thing that makes it, where science comes into astrology, as I'm currently seeing it these days for a couple of years at least, if not the rest of my life, is that the science is more of like a social science. You're actually performing science on let's just talk about a consultation. When you're having a consultation with someone, I'm giving an astrology reading to somebody and I am telling them something about their chart and they give me feedback and respond. The science comes in there. If I tell them something that is meaningful to them, and then I make a note, note to self, Jupiter over the midheaven means XYZ for this person. And then I take a chance. To me, being an astrologer is being a risk taker. And I come to client number 2 and I'm like, I see Jupiter is over the midheaven right now in your chart. Does this resonate with you? Or maybe I'm kind of a risk taker. So I'm like, I think XYZ. And if they're like, oh gosh, that's exactly right. I'm like, okay, 2 points in favor of that idea. And so it doesn't mean that Jupiter over the midheaven means XYZ. That's not the conclusion, because I'm not doing science on the reality of Jupiter over the midheaven as an objective phenomenon for all humans. And it gets way more complicated than this. I don't have time to get into it. I love this. I could talk about this much more, but I just think it's already been a long live and we shouldn't get too much deeper into this. But
I don't know, for me, because you probably have things to do, but until Maya changes mood, I'm loving this and can keep going. And I feel like I talked too much, so I really want to hear you talk more.
Okay, well, maybe we can get into it more, but let me finish my first thought at least, though, because I can get distracted. Not at least, I'm already distracted now. What it means is that Jupiter over the midheaven for some subset of humans is in accord with ideas that are XYZ-ish. It's very open, somewhat general, somewhat specific, but not too specific. And it's every time you do a reading, that's why having experience as an astrologer is very helpful to actually becoming a good astrologer. You're probably going to make some mistakes in the beginning. Every time you have a reading which adds to that equation, you are doing science, because you are scientifically validating that these things mean these things. You're drawing correspondences that actually bear fruit, not as a objective testable reality through mathematical determining the heart rate of the client related to the altitude of Jupiter. That's too specific, but rather as affirming that the client responded positively to this kind of language. And so the beauty of astrology as having some kind of scientific value is in being able to talk to more clients better, because you find yourself in a stream of humanity, because there are many streams of humanity. This is getting very complex, but you could say all of humanity belongs in one massive river, sure, because we're all humans. But then in that river, there are all these eddies and little rivulets. And you as an individual might find yourself in one part of the river close to all the other fishes that you're around, but there's a whole nother school of fish over there. And yes, you can switch schools of fishes if you know how, and if the river supports that activity. But while you're in your school of fish, you are doing the things those fishes are doing. So my clients tend to be ones that are in my school for a lot of reasons. So therefore, they tend to be the ones who recognize that when I say Jupiter is going over the midheaven, XYZ is true, they relate to that statement. And so do you see where the science is coming in? The hypothesis Jupiter over the midheaven means XYZ. You test that hypothesis on your clients. They affirm or deny that. And then that if it supports the original hypothesis, you are strengthening your theory.
We have to be willing also to release a definition if it doesn't work.
Definitely.
And then also, more interestingly, in our practice, lets this happen a lot to see why it works sometimes and doesn't at other times.
Sure. And one of those might be because like you might be in two different schools at the same time if you can like go there. Or you might be shifting schools. When I say schools, I mean that both literally and metaphorically. The school of fish that you belong to, or the part of the river you're in. Or you might get caught in an eddy, and then you only think that science is real and like astrology is bunk. That would be like an eddy that I advise you to not get caught in.
I will say that Maya did poo when you said astrology was not science. Like, in that moment. So that's what she thinks.
Well, then
we'll see how that develops. But yeah, and then also, like, will we say a Gemini Jupiter at the midheaven is the same as a Cancer Jupiter at the midheaven? And then so like, does the Jupiter midheaven astrocartography line work for me the same that it does for you? You mentioned altitude, right? So like, a Gemini Jupiter at the midheaven actually has a much higher altitude than an Aries Jupiter at the midheaven if you're Northern Hemisphere born, right? So does altitude like contribute? And this is where like astrology gives birth to so much astronomical potential, and why so much of astronomy was actually developed by astrologers. And that's actually like, I remember when I took astronomy, like University of Colorado, just basic astronomy, that was the thing that they did say about astrology, that back in the day, the astronomers were the astrologers, and they actually gave credit to astrologers to bringing so much in. I'm wondering, like, I'm looking at Wikipedia right now in their article for Zodiac. And like, I teach a few different definitions of Zodiac for my Astronomy for Astrologers classes. And one that I use is one that, like, a lot of the books don't say Zodiac at all. It'd be interesting in the astronomical textbook that you're using for your college curriculum to see if Zodiac's in the glossary or whatever.
Yeah, I could look into it, but
the top entry at Wikipedia, so according to the CIA is what that means, is that the zodiac is a belt-shaped region of the sky that extends approximately 8 degrees north and south as measured in celestial latitude of the ecliptic, the apparent path of the sun across the celestial sphere over the course of the year.
Yeah, so I call that the zodiacal belt. And there's a reason that that's 8 degrees, and probably has to do with the maximum
latitude
that the planets reach from the ecliptic. Although I don't know, I think it might
Mercury and Venus
get around there.
They can go like 8.5 degrees north and south. Moon, as we know, maxes at about 5.
Yeah.
Jupiter stays religiously close, and on we go. Once you get out to Pluto, or so like the asteroids that you were studying, that like the game is up. So maybe that's why it is. It might also be interesting to explore that from like well, let me leave all that aside. It's going to get too complex. And Maya's already gone beyond thinker to eating her hand. And so that we get into pretty treacherous space this is like one of the most Gemini beings on the planet as far as like superstelliums are concerned. And so we don't want to think her hand off.
She's got a lot of stuff in Gemini?
Yeah, so Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter.
Nice. Oh, that's great. Oh, and I wanted to say one little comment when you were riffing off the altitude and like the midheaven, and a word I'm sure you love. Don't forget about the nonagesimal, which gives a whole nother really important element to the value of height in the chart.
Totally. Yeah, you know what? I've been trying to experience tides.
Nice.
I've never been like a water person, so I've never been a surfer or fisher or other kind of, water being, which I think is when you really get so deeply in relationship with the tides. And many, of course, surfers are going to like track them, and or fishermen, whatever. But like just going down to the park where like the water will be low or high, trying to figure out what the moon and sun are doing. And there's this interesting thing where, first of all, like the non-adjustimals are much more like the tides are about the non-adjustable, not the midheaven. And like high and low tides, like when moon rising or at its high, like at square to the ascendant versus culminating. And of course, it's not just moon, but moon and sun. But then there's also this like delayed effect. All right, baby, we're just about done. Yeah, so it's like not in that moment. But see, like that's a thing that I feel like I'm interested in like looking at progressed high and low tides during the year. And since like tides have so much to do also with the shape of the earth, and of course the phase of the moon is really all about watching the moon reflect sunlight from Earth's point of view, it brings us into such a deep relationship of these three things. And like, Earth's made of 70% water, and so are you. And so like we should be very tidal beings, you know what I mean? So I feel like it's a place where through like scientific method, if you will, the astronomically inclined astrologer could add a whole other bit of correspondences into our craft.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I have some astronomy friends who do occultations of asteroids on a semi-regular basis.
Wow.
And to get into that, it's a very delicate procedure. You have to have your telescope set up. You have to have like very good timing on your device and all that. But he's very good at it. He's done about 6 in the past year. And, there's another opportunity there for combining astronomy and astrology.
Totally. And so, I mean, that's, I think, a thing that's so important about the scopes. I mean, so I call in my work the ecliptic the circle of spirit, because it's where the sun lives.
Yeah.
In the equator, the circle of matter, because it really has nothing to do with anything but the earth. And that, I'm not trying to put spirit and matter in some hierarchy when I say that. That's just how I consider it. But I do find that it's interesting that astronomy at some point shifting away from its focus on the planets, which would have been true during the astronomy equals astrologer day, to more of an equatorial focus. They've shifted from what I call the circle of spirit to the circle of matter. And it's very interesting to consider like the emerging rationalist, materialist, scientist archetype of our day and age versus the, archetype back in the day of, Vidius Valens or whatever.
Yeah, it is.
But yeah, there's another thing I'll just share about occultations, just so we can nerd out maybe another time, is it's really initiating me into the power of parallax. I went and saw a Mars occultation, moon occulted Mars, from our local view some time ago, and we had a little gathering here. We watched the moon eat Mars and spit Mars out the other side.
I think that did not happen in Tennessee, or if it did, it was cloudy.
I think it went north of you.
I think so too. Yeah.
And so what happens? We saw the whole thing. Reflecting back, there were some really cool correspondences that seemed to associate with that occultation. But then Anna and I were walking back to the car, and I cast a chart in that moment. And moon was just conjoining Mars. So we saw it before it happened geocentrically, and then folks in London saw it like after it happened geocentrically, and I was amazed by that.
And I think that's really important for eclipses too, especially solar eclipses where you're in the shadow. Like if you're gonna experience a solar eclipse in real life, that's more important than like casting the chart from some geocentric location.
Agreed. Although I'll share some interesting things. Well, let's do that another time. Let's you and I gather for a parallax, the power of parallax.
That sounds awesome. Yeah.
Noah, I am so happy, and Maya, I'm so happy you joined us in the end. And everybody that's here, thank you so much for the presence of your presence. But Noah, I'm just so glad that we could connect and share love and talk astrology, astronomy, and all these things. It's really beautiful.
Thanks for inviting me. It was wonderful.
My pleasure. Let's do it again sometime. And folks, do please visit Noah's website. So I have found that searching astronomology online will get you there, but more specifically, noahfrere.com, Frere. Okay. You can see me at geminibrett.com. Also, I really wanted to guess, because you and I also have a love for the tarot. I wanted to go there today.
Oh, wow.
But we didn't have time, so another time. But for those of you who are in my school's constellations membership group, please know that Phelan Shiva will be leading our monthly Astro Tarot circle in a few hours at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And if any of you would like to know more about constellations, head over to geminibrett.com and click the communities tab. We have a different teacher every, 4 teachers shifting, alternating between the weeks. And tonight it's Astro Tarot time. So hope to see you there. Cool. All right, Noah, big blessings, brother. I'm so glad that you're safe through the storm. And I look forward to seeing you again when stars align.
All right. Thanks so much. Peace.
Right. Bye-bye. Where's that button?